Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled, A Symphony of Us: The Journey of Love, Dreams, and Family. The morning sun stretched gently across the rooftops of Windermere, a quiet town nestled between rolling green hills and sleepy stone cottages. Light spilled through the lace curtains of a second-floor bedroom, casting soft patterns across the worn oak floorboards. Inside, an elderly woman stood before the mirror, pinning her silver-streaked hair into a tidy twist. Her name was Evelyn Hartley, a name that once rang through concert halls and now echoed quietly in the hearts of those who knew her. She took a deep breath and adjusted the lapels of her navy blue coat. Her fingers, though slightly wrinkled, moved with the grace of memory, a dancer retracing old steps. On the bed beside her lay a small suitcase, packed neatly with only the essentials: a wool scarf, a cherished notebook, and a weathered photograph in a brass frame. Evelyn's eyes lingered on the photo. In it, two teenagers stood beneath the railway clock, one with a trumpet case, the other clutching a cello. They were laughing. The boy's name had been Miles Ashcroft. And today, after more than 2 years of letters and missed connections, she would see him again. With a practiced motion, she picked up her walking stick, smooth ashwood with a carved silver fox on the handle, and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, scented faintly with chimney smoke and rain on cobblestones. Evelyn walked slowly but confidently to Windermere Station, her cane tapping a familiar rhythm along the path. Though she had crossed her 80th winter, there was a brightness in her stride and a quiet elegance in her posture that made passers-by glance twice. Children waved. A shopkeeper tipped his hat. Evelyn smiled, politely, though her mind was already drifting. At the station, the hum of activity wrapped around her. People bustled with coffee cups and backpacks, announcements echoed overhead, and a distant train groaned into motion on another platform. Evelyn found her way to platform 3, where the London Express was due to arrive. There, she paused, not because she was tired, but because this was a place of memory. The same platform, the same autumn breeze, the same quiet anticipation. It had been decades since that first journey, but Evelyn remembered it vividly, her younger self standing at this very spot, her cello strapped to her back, clutching egg sandwiches her mother had made. She had been 17, hopeful, nervous, and about to take the first great step of her life. Today, she stood again not as the girl with wide eyes, but as a woman with a heart full of songs and stories. The loudspeaker crackled to life, announcing a minor delay to the London train. Evelyn didn't mind. She gazed down the length of the tracks, letting her thoughts wander. Nearby, a pair of teenagers were laughing and arguing over who forgot the tickets. A woman in a business suit scrolled through her phone, earbuds in. And Evelyn simply watched, the scene unfolding like a theater she'd visited many times before. And then it came softly at first, almost hidden in the distant murmur, the low, comforting rumble of a train on the approach. But it wasn't the train that stirred her heart. It was the sound beneath it. The mechanical squeal, the breath of steel, the whistle. Those sounds carried something else entirely. They carried her backward. In her mind's eye, she was once again 17. The wind blew stronger that day in her memory. Her long blonde hair had whipped about her face, and she had tried to keep it in place with one hand while holding her cello close with the other. Her sister had drawn a good luck card with the word spelled wrong, good luck, which made Evelyn smile even now. Back then, she had been preparing to audition for a place at the prestigious Royal Conservatory of London. Her heart had thundered with nerves. She hadn't known what to expect, only that it would change everything. And she had been right. The train pulled into the station with a hiss, dragging Evelyn gently back to the present. The doors opened with a mechanical swish. A young woman in a mustard yellow coat approached her. "Would you like a hand with your bag, ma'am?" Evelyn turned with a grateful nod. "Thank you, dear. That's very kind." Together, they climbed aboard. Evelyn settled into a backward-facing window seat she had reserved, placing her handbag on her lap and her cane beside her. The young woman hoisted the suitcase into the overhead rack and gave a playful reminder not to forget it when she left. Evelyn chuckled. "I've made this trip many times," she replied, "but thank you. I'll be sure not to leave anything behind." As the young woman disappeared down the aisle to find her own seat, Evelyn looked out the window. The platform was growing distant now as the train slid into motion. Her hometown receded slowly, first the station roof, then the church spire, and finally the fields she had walked as a girl. The announcements about the buffet car and luggage rules faded into the background as Evelyn's gaze drifted once more. She had a long journey ahead. But it wasn't just a journey to London. It was a journey through time. A return to the music, to the youth she once knew, and to a friend whose trumpet had once turned a train carriage into a stage. And if the years had softened their memories, Evelyn hoped that today would make them whole again. The train glided southward, rhythmic and serene, its wheels humming a lullaby to the countryside. Evelyn hardly sat by the window, her eyes watching the world slip past like brush strokes in motion, hedgerows, rolling meadows, and the occasional curious cow blinking at the silver blur of steel. Inside the carriage, a quiet hum of life filled the space, pages turning, conversations whispered, the faint clatter of teacups from the trolley in the next car. But Evelyn wasn't present in that moment. Not fully. Her mind had wandered again back to the past, back to the platform on that unforgettable day in the summer of 1950. She had been 17. And the whole world had felt wide open. She remembered how the wind had tugged at her skirt and sent her hair flying like golden ribbons. Her mother, ever meticulous, had tried to tame it with a silk scarf, but Evelyn had pulled it off just before arriving at the station. She wanted to feel the wind. She wanted to arrive as herself. Her cello case had been heavy but familiar, like carrying a trusted friend. She cradled it against her side with one arm while clutching a worn leather satchel in the other. Inside the satchel had been 4 egg and watercress sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a small tin of barley sweets, and a soft pouch containing her cosmetics powder, lip tint, a mirror. Nestled between them was a folded note, a homemade card, drawn hastily in crayon by her younger sister Lucy. Evelyn smiled now, recalling the crooked handwriting and the misspelled message that read, "Good luck, Evelyn. You are the bravest." Lucy had added a cartoon cello with sparkles around it. Back then, Evelyn had tucked the card inside her sheet music folder, not because it was practical, but because it felt like a shield. Something to carry with her into the unknown. That day's journey had been her first time traveling alone. Her parents had stood on the platform waving, her mother with a handkerchief, her father with his arms crossed proudly. Lucy had jumped up and down, shouting through the steam, "Play loud, Evie." Louder than all of London. The train had lurched into motion, and Evelyn had pressed her forehead to the cool glass, watching their figures grow smaller, blurred by distance and tears. She blinked now, returning to the present. A couple seated nearby opened a box of pastries, giggling as they tried to split an almond croissant without making a mess. Evelyn smiled softly. How little the human heart changed, no matter the decade. Her hands, resting in her lap, curled slightly at the memory of her audition day. The nerves. The expectation. The weight of dreams too large to contain. She had been traveling to the Royal Conservatory, where a panel of stern-faced musicians would determine whether she belonged in their hallowed halls. Her teacher had warned her, "You'll be one of 1,000. But Evelyn hadn't been afraid. Not really. There had been something steady in her back even then. The cello was her voice, and she had always known how to sing through strings. What she hadn't known, what no one could have predicted, was that her life would begin to change before she even arrived at the conservatory. Because partway through the journey, as the train passed through the Midlands, someone had opened the carriage door with a theatrical bang. He had burst in like a gust of sunlight. A young man no older than her, wearing a scuffed blazer and a crooked tie. His black hair was slicked to one side in an effort that had mostly failed. Slung over his shoulder was a canvas rucksack, and in his hand was a pristine trumpet case with polished brass latches. "Excuse me," he had said, his voice clear and warm. "Is there room for one more?" "Two, actually. I'm afraid my trumpet insists on a seat of its own." Evelyn had looked up, startled. Then amused. "Only if your trumpet promises not to snore," she had replied. They both laughed. His name was Miles. Just Miles. No middle name, no fuss. He had plopped down across from her, placed the trumpet case carefully on the adjacent seat, and opened a book on jazz theory upside down. Evelyn had tried to focus on the countryside flashing past, but she could feel his presence like a pulse across the table. The way he fidgeted. The way his fingers tapped the edge of his seat as if itching to play. He smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and peppermint. When she finally asked why he was heading to London, his answer had been as casual as it was exciting: audition. Royal Conservatory. Thought I'd crash the party. Evelyn's heart had skipped. They were heading to the same destination, chasing the same dream, though from wildly different instruments. The conversation that followed had unfolded like music itself, crescendos of laughter, soft interludes of shyness, harmonies where their stories overlapped. By the time the conductor passed through the carriage, teasing them for occupying extra seats with sleeping instruments, the two had become unlikely co-conspirators in an unspoken adventure. The train ride had gone too fast. Back in the present, Evelyn exhaled slowly and watched her reflection flicker in the glass. Lines framed her eyes now. Her hair had changed. But beneath it all, the girl from the train still lived. She still carried Lucy's card. She still remembered how it felt to meet someone who saw the world in the same strange rhythm. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a slip of folded paper, and opened it. "Good luck, Evelyn," it read, still misspelled. The corners were soft now. The color faded. But the meaning unchanged. Outside, the train began to slow slightly, curving around a bend. A bell chimed through the overhead speaker, announcing that the London outskirts were near. Evelyn folded the paper and placed it gently back in her bag. There was still time. Still time to remember. Still time to reunite. And still time to find out if Miles Ashcroft, the boy with the trumpet, still carried music in his heart. The countryside slowly gave way to signs of the city telephone wires rising like skeletal arms from the grasslands, squat industrial buildings lurking on the horizon, and traffic thickening on distant motorways. Evelyn sat unmoving, her gaze distant but focused inward, like someone reading a memory that had never truly faded. She had barely touched the tea the steward had offered her. It sat in a paper cup on the fold-out tray in front of her, untouched, going cold. Instead, her mind was echoing with the vibrant sound of that trumpet. It had happened after the ticket inspector had teased them. Evelyn remembered how Miles had leaned in conspiratorially and whispered, "I never leave home without a bribe." She thought he meant money. Instead, he reached into his rucksack, pulled out the trumpet, and with a wink, brought it to his lips. There was no warning. No permission asked. Just breath, brass, and boldness. And then music. Walking the Dog by Gershwin, bright, brassy, bursting with cheeky flair. He played it like a dare, like a poem recited sideways. The notes rolled out into the carriage like a warm breeze, and passengers poked their heads around the corners of seats with surprised smiles. Evelyn had been stunned. Not just by the audacity but the talent. It was effortless, as if the instrument were merely the echo of his heartbeat. When he finished, the passengers clapped. Some even whistled. Evelyn, red-cheeked, could only stare. Miles grinned and made a small, mocking bow in her direction. "You didn't tell me you were good," she had said, voice barely audible above the hum. He had shrugged. "Didn't want to seem like I was showing off." She shook her head then, and now sitting on this new train, all these decades later, she shook it again. Miles Ashcroft had always been showing off. But he'd made it look like generosity. He had made the whole world feel like it was listening. The current journey hummed along. Across from her, the seat was empty. That fact made her smile. Back in 1950, it hadn't stayed empty for long. After the trumpet incident, the two had talked for hours. They had shared their dreams, their fears, their instruments' quirks. She told him how the cello sometimes bruised her collarbone, how her fingers ached when she practiced scales too much. He told her about a tooth he'd chipped once by dropping his trumpet on his own face. They laughed until their cheeks hurt. And then something changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But like a chord slipping into harmony. At one point, Evelyn had unwrapped one of the sandwiches from her satchel and offered him half. He had taken it with a quiet thanks, but then carefully unwrapped the wax paper to examine it. "Egg and watercress?" he asked. She nodded. "Family recipe. Passed down from grandmother to mother to daughter. Likely to kill an army if refrigerated improperly." He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the sandwich. That moment. That exact moment. That's when something subtle and irreversible began between them. Evelyn hadn't known it yet, but a story had started writing itself, one not about auditions or music, but about connection. A meeting of two melodies that, for a moment, knew exactly how to move in sync. The train slowed slightly, brakes sighing beneath them. Evelyn glanced at the scrolling text above the aisle. Approaching London King's Cross. Estimated arrival, 23 minutes. Almost there. Her heart fluttered unexpectedly. She hadn't realized how much she wanted to see him again. After all this time. After the letters, the years, the lives lived in parallel. Would he be the same? She let her gaze wander again toward the aisle, where a young couple sat diagonally across from her. They were both in their early 20s, if that. The boy had thick black curls and freckles. The girl wore a yellow cardigan and had tucked her feet up onto the seat. They were holding hands under the table, not saying much, but sharing something deep in the silence. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't performative. But it was there, tangible and private, like the space between piano notes. Evelyn didn't mean to stare, but she couldn't help it. The sight of them drew out another memory, one she hadn't thought about in years. The conservatory. She had arrived, cello on her back, heart in her throat. The auditions were grueling, 4 judges in a cold room, each tapping notes as she played, eyes giving nothing away. Evelyn had given it everything. Every note, every breath. And when she left the room, she collapsed onto a bench and nearly wept. Miles had been waiting there, trumpet case in his lap. She never found out if he finished his audition before her or was still waiting. But he was there. "You look like someone who survived battle," he'd said. "I think I'm dead," she replied. He passed her a barley sweet, unwrapped. She didn't ask where it came from. That was the first time he called her by a nickname. Ev. Just Ev. So natural, like it belonged to her all along. Now, in the present, Evelyn let that name echo inside her. Ev. Would he say it again? She watched the landscape flatten into buildings. The trees gave way to rooftops, then to chimneys, cranes, red brick, and steel. London was coming. So was the moment she had been waiting for. Would he be there? They had promised, long ago, that if the world scattered them, they would still meet at Platform 5, King's Cross. A tradition they had kept as much as life allowed. She had last seen him 2 years ago. He had been wearing a blue waistcoat, had a new walking cane, and told her with great pride that he had just learned how to make lemon drizzle cake without burning it. They had laughed over coffee. They had hugged for longer than usual. And then just letters again. But now, the train was slowing. The station drawing closer. The anticipation rising. Evelyn reached into her handbag again and pulled out a small silver locket. Inside was a photo, 2 teenagers standing beneath the railway clock. Miles and Evelyn. His trumpet slung over his shoulder. Her cello case like armor. Both of them beaming. Just music and maybes. She pressed the locket closed with a click. The announcement rang out, "Next stop King's Cross." She exhaled. Not long now. The train let out a long sigh as it pulled into King's Cross, wheels screeching gently against the rails. Evelyn Hartley sat upright in her seat, her gloved hands resting atop the polished leather of her handbag. All around her, the other passengers stirred, zippers zipped, chatter resumed, phones lit up like fireflies as people prepared to re-enter the city's pulse. But Evelyn felt none of that. She was in another place entirely. Caught between the hum of the present and the distant call of a trumpet from long ago. A young man across the aisle stood up, gently retrieved his girlfriend's suitcase from the overhead rack, and then turned to Evelyn with a polite smile. "Would you like me to get yours too, ma'am?" She looked up, surprised at first, then warmed by his gesture. "Yes, thank you. That's very kind." He passed it down carefully, and she gave a soft nod. "You remind me of someone I once met on a train. A very long time ago." The boy grinned. "Hope he was charming." "Oh, dangerously," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The couple disappeared into the stream of disembarking passengers. Evelyn took a breath and waited for the wave to pass. She never liked to rush. Eventually, she rose with the grace of someone who had done this many times before. Her cane tapped gently on the floor as she stepped off the train and onto the platform. The air was thicker here, infused with perfume, coffee, diesel, and the frantic movement of people too busy to notice anything around them. But Evelyn noticed everything. Her eyes scanned the crowd as her suitcase rolled beside her, trailing its soft rubber hum. Her pace was slow, deliberate. And yet, beneath every step, her heart was galloping. Platform 5. It was their place. Not by coincidence, but by design. The spot where it all began. The first time, they had stood shoulder to shoulder there, both 17, clutching instruments and dreams too big for their arms. They had faced the city like two misfits who found harmony in each other. She made her way past a group of tourists and a young mother wrestling with a stroller. A street musician strummed a guitar in the distance, and for a moment Evelyn's breath caught until she realized it was just chords, not brass. She reached the end of platform 5 and paused. No trumpet. No Miles. A flicker of doubt crossed her face. 2 years had passed since their last meeting. Could something have changed? Could he have forgotten? She looked around again. Nothing. Her fingers clenched the handle of her suitcase a little tighter. And then, a sound. Soft at first. Almost lost in the clatter of footsteps and rolling luggage. But Evelyn heard it. She would know it anywhere. The trumpet. Not just a trumpet but their tune. Walking the dog. She turned, her breath caught somewhere in her chest. Her eyes scanned the space until they landed on him. Miles Ashcroft. He stood near the old clock under the iron arch right where they had taken their first photo all those years ago. His trumpet gleamed under the station lights, his hair now snow-white and combed carefully to one side. He wore a gray overcoat and a navy scarf wrapped just once around his neck. And he was playing. With the same joy. The same cheeky cadence. The same warmth that had captivated her on a train in 1950. People around him had begun to stop, forming a loose circle. They clapped along softly, smiling, recording on their phones. But Miles didn't seem to notice them. His eyes were closed. Evelyn stood frozen. She didn't call out not yet. Instead, she walked slowly, reverently, as though entering a sacred space. The music soared, notes leaping like laughter through the air. He hit the final notes with a triumphant flourish and a subtle grin. Then the clapping came. Miles opened his eyes and saw her. For a moment, the crowd disappeared. The noise vanished. The years melted like snow under sunlight. Evelyn and Miles. Two old souls who had danced through different lifetimes, yet always found their way back to the same rhythm. He lowered the trumpet slowly, eyes bright with disbelief and joy. You came, he said, his voice hoarse with something unspoken. I always do, she whispered. He stepped forward, dropping his trumpet into its case with one hand and reaching out with the other. She didn't hesitate. Their hands met frail fingers, old joints, softened skin, but beneath it, the same pulse. The same spark. He chuckled, eyes glassy. You still carry that locket? Always. And your cello? Retired. But it misses you. He laughed, a full, hearty laugh that bounced off the station walls. Then came the hug. It wasn't brief. It wasn't casual. It was the kind of embrace that rewrote time. One that stitched together everything that had come between, from missed letters to silent years, from distant continents to long-awaited reunions. When they pulled back, Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. You look terrible, she teased. So do you, he replied. But you're still the most beautiful thing in this whole station. Liar. Musician, he corrected. They both laughed. The crowd had begun to move on, their interest in the street performance fading. But to Evelyn, the applause still echoed. Not because of the music, but because this was the moment they had waited for. A moment carved from the noise of the world, held still only by memory and love. Miles picked up his trumpet case. Coffee? Or are you going to make me serenade you all the way to the cafe? Only if you play something new, she said with a smirk. Something new? He raised an eyebrow. She nodded. We've danced enough to old songs. He smiled and offered his arm. Then let's write a new one. They walked side by side through the archways of King's Cross, two travelers with more past than future, but with a melody still left to play. And behind them, echoing faintly in the station air, the last notes of Walking the Dog drifted into silence. Long before the applause, before Platform 5 became sacred ground, before life took its circuitous path, there had been a letter. Evelyn had kept it for months in a wooden drawer under her bed, folded neatly in its envelope with the Royal Conservatory's golden crest pressed into the wax seal. She had never shown it to anyone outside her family, not even to Miles, though he likely assumed she had received it. She had accepted. Top percentile. Full scholarship for the duration of the program. It should have been the happiest moment of her life. And for a few days, it was. Her parents had cried when she read the letter aloud. Lucy had drawn another card, this time spelling congratulations with 2 N's and 3 T's. Evelyn had been wrapped in celebration and the promise of everything she'd worked for. But then came the film. It wasn't planned. It wasn't grand. It was a rainy Thursday in August, and her school friend Margaret had invited her to the small town cinema. Come on, she'd said. You've been practicing until your fingers look like raisins. Let's watch something silly. Evelyn had agreed. But what they watched wasn't silly. The screen came alive with flickering images of a woman in a bonnet moving through candle-lit hallways, holding a lamp over wounded soldiers and writing letters in the dark. The title, The Lady of the Lamp. Florence Nightingale. Evelyn had never paid much attention to history before that night, never found herself particularly drawn to anything outside of music. But something in the woman's eyes, the conviction, the quiet power she carried without force, it took root somewhere deep inside her. She had leaned forward in her chair. Her heart beat differently. The cello faded from her thoughts, the concert halls, the applause, all of it dimmed beneath a stronger light. When the credits rolled, Margaret turned and asked, "Did you fall asleep?" "No," Evelyn whispered. "I think I just woke up." Back at home that night, she took the letter from the conservatory out again. She read it under the amber glow of her desk lamp, eyes scanning each word like they belonged to someone else. Then she folded it slowly, placed it back into the envelope, and set it aside. In its place, she opened a new notebook and wrote, St. Thomas's Hospital, Nurse Training Program. Application requirements. The next few weeks passed in a blur of debate and silence. Her parents were stunned when she told them. Her mother had cried not from disappointment, but confusion. "But music is who you are, Evie," she had said. Evelyn could only shake her head. "Music helped me find my voice, yes. But I want that voice to matter. I want to make something better. Something that stays." Lucy had said nothing at all. Just hugged her tightly and whispered, "You'll still play for me, right?" "Always." She had written to the conservatory to decline. The words were clinical and respectful. But her heart throbbed with every keystroke. She did not tell Miles. She didn't know how. He had already left for London weeks earlier, starting orientation, meeting his tutors, diving into the dizzying whirlpool of conservatory life. She didn't want to send a letter that might make him question everything, or worse, make him sad. So she waited. And one evening, a reply came not from the conservatory, but from St. Thomas's Hospital. Dear Ms. Hartley, we are pleased to inform you. Evelyn's memories flickered like film reel as she sat in the present-day cafe at King's Cross, stirring a cup of Earl Grey that had long since gone tepid. Across from her, Miles was rummaging through his satchel for a sugar packet, muttering about how the cafe never had real brown sugar anymore. "So," he said finally, settling back. "Tell me the part of the story you never did." She blinked. "Which part?" "The one where you became a nurse instead of a cellist." Evelyn smiled, took a sip, and leaned back. "You know, I saw The Lady of the Lamp, right?" "Everyone did back then." Half the country applied to nursing schools after that. Well, she said, tapping her teaspoon softly on the saucer, I was one of them. He chuckled. That movie nearly broke up the conservatory's cello department. She laughed, but then turned serious. It wasn't just the movie. It was something I felt. Like a thread pulling me somewhere else. Were you scared? He asked. She nodded. Terrified. But also ready. Miles grew quiet, looking down into his coffee. And you never regretted it? Not once, she said, after a pause. Though I did miss the strings. And the stage. And she glanced at him with a soft smile. Some company I met on a train. He looked up, met her eyes, and returned the smile. We had our stage. We still do. Evelyn told him everything that afternoon. About her training. About nights working in wards by candlelight during blackouts. About the first child she helped save. About the ones she didn't. About traveling to the Middle East with her cello in tow, playing lullabies in refugee camps. About all the times she wrote to him but never sent the letters. He listened. Like he had always listened. In return, he told her of smoky clubs in New Orleans, late-night jazz sets in Chicago, trumpet duets under Parisian bridges, and once, accidentally playing Ave Maria at a rock concert in Berlin. They laughed until the staff politely asked if they needed anything else. Code for closing soon. Outside, the station lights were flickering on. Evening crept through the high glass windows, and the crowd began to thin. They stepped out together into the cooling air. Evelyn held her scarf close. Miles looked up at the sky. Do you remember, he said softly, what you told me the first time I played on that train? She smirked. Something about snoring trumpets. No. After that. You said, you make the world quieter when you play, not louder. She paused. Did I? You did. They stood in silence for a while, watching the lights blink across the city. I missed you, he said at last. I was always here, she replied. Miles smiled, and then gently, reverently, took her hand. Then let's not wait another 2 years. She squeezed his fingers. Let's not wait at all. And beneath the great arches of King's Cross, two friends who had once walked parallel lives began at last to walk side by side again. For the next few months, Evelyn and Miles settled into an easy rhythm, a friendship rekindled in the glow of shared memories. King's Cross, though still sacred to them, had become less of a destination and more of a meeting point, one among many. In the days and weeks that followed, they exchanged stories, music, and laughter, each encounter another stitch in the fabric of their long-standing bond. But life, as it always did, began to pull them in separate directions. Evelyn found herself again drawn into the world of nursing, this time, on a grander scale. St. Thomas's Hospital was bustling with the weight of London's ever-expanding needs. She spent her days in wards, her nights spent in the company of sick and suffering souls, all while carrying with her a piece of the world she'd left behind. And then there was Miles. He was still on the road: jazz festivals, small clubs in New Orleans, a tour that had him hopping from one city to the next, a swirl of trumpet notes and smoky rooms. Their occasional meetups became rarer, but the distance was never something they acknowledged in their letters. They spoke as if time and space didn't matter. Their letters were the bridge. Each one arrived with a familiar scent of the places they'd been and the lives they led. Miles's letters were always typed, neatly, each word meticulously placed like the notes of a well-rehearsed melody. Evelyn's were handwritten, her flowing script always neat but warm, filled with small, intimate details of her daily life. Sometimes they wrote about music: Miles's latest performance in Paris, Evelyn's quiet moments with her cello, the one piece of her that never let her forget her roots. Other times, they shared little things. Miles's story of a brief, light-hearted encounter with a street performer in Rome who had mistaken him for a famous jazz trumpeter. Evelyn's story about a patient she'd met, an old woman who had never learned to read, but who could sing every word to Danny Boy from memory. And always, the unspoken thread between them: comfort, understanding, a love that had never quite taken the shape of romance but had always been just as deep. One day, as autumn began to melt into the colder months, Evelyn sat by the window of her small London flat, a steaming cup of tea cradled in her hands. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind: patients, paperwork, early mornings, and late nights. She had nearly forgotten how quickly time had passed since that first meeting with Miles, until a familiar letter arrived. This one was a little different. Miles had written in the margins of the letter, "I think it's time we stop writing to each other. Not because we don't care, but because I miss you. I want to see you again. I want to talk about all the things we never got to say." Evelyn read the words twice, slowly, letting them sink in. There was something about the simplicity of those words, the quiet intensity that they carried, that made her feel like she was hearing a melody she had always known but never quite understood. She set the letter down carefully and closed her eyes, letting the familiar ache of longing wash over her. The two of them had been in each other's lives for so long now, it was impossible to imagine a world without Miles's letters, his trumpet, his easy grin. But something was different now. The years of their separation, though filled with stories, had also built walls. They hadn't been able to see each other the way they once did. They had grown, yes, but in different directions. And yet, their friendship had remained as constant as the stars in the night sky. Evelyn picked up her pen and began to write. "I can't help but think of us, back when we were 18. How strange it feels, to remember that version of ourselves. But we were always meant for something greater than ourselves, weren't we? And now, I see it. The things we didn't say, the things I never told you. She paused, letting the pen hover over the paper for a moment, unsure how to express the mix of emotions that swirled in her chest. And then she wrote, I miss you too, Miles. More than I think I've ever said. But we've both built something important now, haven't we? The music, the work. But also the space in between. Let's not forget that we have been here before, and we can be here again. When the time is right, I'll come to you. She folded the letter carefully, her hands trembling slightly as she sealed the envelope. The decision had been made. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. Miles was right, they didn't need to write anymore. The time for words was over. It was time to play again. A week later, Evelyn found herself on a train once more. She wasn't sure where the thought had come from. Perhaps it was the winter chill that had crept in, or perhaps it was the aching gap that had opened up between them, a space that had become too large to ignore. She hadn't told anyone. Not even Lucy. She packed lightly just a small suitcase, her favorite book of poetry, and a pair of leather gloves that had seen better days. When the train arrived at King's Cross, she made her way quickly toward the platform. Her heart was beating faster now, as if it too had caught on to the pulse of the moment. Platform 5. She didn't know if he would be there. She didn't know if he would even remember. But Evelyn Hartley knew one thing for certain. She needed to find out. King's Cross Station was a hive of activity. The evening rush had begun, suitcases rolling, travelers rushing to catch their trains, families reunited after long absences. But to Evelyn Hartley, the world seemed to pause as she stepped onto platform 5. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat louder than the noise around her. She hadn't been to the station in over 2 years, but it felt like she had never left. The platforms, the arches, the sound of footsteps on the concrete, all of it was etched into her memory. The memories that were too strong to ignore. Her gaze swept across the crowd, each face a blur. She didn't know what she expected, but she had hoped. Well, hoped that somehow Miles would be there. He was always there when it mattered. And then, as if by some miracle, she saw him. Miles Ashcroft. He was standing near the old clock, his trumpet case at his feet, looking like he had never left the station. His hair was still a little too wild for someone his age, and his coat was well worn but still elegant, as always. His eyes, however, were the same, full of warmth, curiosity, and something deeper that Evelyn had always recognized. For a moment, neither of them moved. The crowd swirled around them, but in that space, it was just the two of them. Time slowed. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she had missed him until she saw him standing there, waiting, as if he had been there all along. Miles, on the other hand, looked as though he had just noticed her standing there. His eyes widened, and a grin spread across his face, slow and deliberate, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a lifetime. "Evie?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. It was a name he hadn't called her in years, but when he said it, it felt like a song, one they had once danced to together. "I didn't think you'd come," he continued, stepping toward her. "I didn't think I could," Evelyn replied, her voice catching in her throat. They stood there for a moment, just staring at each other, both of them processing the years, the silence, and the space between them. The world had moved on. But here they were, standing in the same place, as if no time had passed at all. "Look at you," Miles said, his voice softer now, full of admiration. "You're still, well, you. Beautiful as ever." Evelyn chuckled, her face flushing with warmth. "You haven't changed a bit," she replied, though she knew he had. They both had. He raised an eyebrow. "I beg to differ. I'm definitely getting older." "Me too," she said with a wink. "But some things don't change." They both laughed, and the tension that had hung between them began to dissipate. It was as though they were picking up a conversation they'd left unfinished years ago. "I'm glad you came," Miles said, his expression turning serious. "I've been thinking about you. About us. All those years, Evie." Evelyn took a deep breath, letting the moment settle around her. She hadn't known what to expect when she made the decision to meet him, but now that she was here, with him, it felt right. "I've been thinking about you too," she admitted. "About all of it?" Miles's expression softened. "Do you ever regret it?" Not choosing the conservatory. Choosing a different path." Evelyn paused, her eyes flicking to the ground for a moment. She had asked herself that question countless times over the years. What if she had followed the music? What if she had stayed? But then she thought of the lives she had touched, the people she had helped. The smiles, the laughter, the quiet moments of connection. She thought of the patience, the places she had traveled, the friends she had made, and the way her cello had always been there, even when it wasn't the center of her life. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. It was the right choice. Even if it wasn't what I expected." Miles nodded slowly, his eyes darkening slightly with the weight of understanding. "I get that. I do. But I'm glad you're here now. Glad we're here now." Evelyn smiled softly. "So am I." There was another moment of silence between them, but this one wasn't uncomfortable. It was comfortable, filled with years of unspoken words and shared memories. Miles took a step closer, as if he couldn't bear the distance between them anymore. "I missed you, Evie," he said quietly. "More than I realized." Evelyn's heart fluttered in her chest. She reached out and took his hand, the familiar warmth of his touch making her feel grounded in a way she hadn't expected. "I missed you too," she whispered. For a long moment, they stood there, holding hands on platform 5, as the world around them continued to move. The trains rumbled past, people rushed to catch their connections, and the city buzzed with life. But in that moment, it felt as if nothing else mattered. Not the years that had passed, not the distance they had traveled, not the paths they had taken. All that mattered was that they had found each other again. Finally, Miles broke the silence. "So, what now?" Evelyn's smile widened. "Now, we take our time. We talk. We laugh. We play some music, maybe something new." "Something new?" Miles repeated, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Well, we do seem to have a knack for that." She laughed, squeezing his hand. "It's never too late to start something new." And so, as the station continued to hum with the pulse of life, Evelyn and Miles stood together, ready to write the next chapter of their shared story. A story not of what they had missed, but of what they could still create together. The following weeks passed in a blur of music and memories. The city of London, bustling and ever-changing, seemed to slow its pace whenever Evelyn and Miles found themselves in the same room. Their reconnection, so sudden and yet so familiar, carried with it the comfort of a friendship that had never truly left, despite the years of silence. Evelyn found herself visiting Miles's flat more often than she had ever expected. It wasn't extravagant, but there was a warmth to it, filled with records, old books, and a piano that always seemed to be waiting for someone to play. The walls were lined with photographs, mementos from his travels, and newspaper clippings about performances he had given. It was a space that spoke of a life fully lived, even if some chapters had yet to be written. Miles, for his part, had settled into his own rhythm of constant motion, performing in clubs, festivals, and even some larger venues. But after his reunion with Evelyn, the restlessness that had once driven him seemed to calm. He no longer rushed to fill the silence between songs with travel. He wanted something deeper, something more meaningful than just the applause of strangers. One evening, as the autumn chill began to settle over the city, Miles invited Evelyn to one of his performances, a small jazz club in Soho. The place was dimly lit, filled with smoke and laughter, with people huddled together at tables, drinks in hand, watching the musicians play with their hearts on their sleeves. Evelyn sat at the back, nursing a glass of wine, her fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the table as she watched him perform. The trumpet, once a symbol of their shared history, now felt like a new instrument altogether. Miles had changed, but so had she. As the final notes of the night rang out, the crowd erupted into applause. Miles bowed, his face flushed with the joy of a job well done. But as he turned to leave the stage, his eyes found Evelyn's in the back, and his expression softened. It wasn't the applause that mattered. It was seeing her there, his oldest friend, now the most important note in his life. After the show, they walked through the streets of Soho, the lights reflecting off the wet pavement, their steps matching the rhythm of the night. That was incredible, Evelyn said, her voice full of admiration. You've come a long way, Miles. I'm just getting started, he replied, a playful glint in his eyes. But I think I'm finally playing the music that matters. They paused at a street corner, the sounds of the city fading into the background. Miles turned to her, a serious expression taking over his features. Evie, he began, I've been thinking a lot about what we said before, about the past. I've spent so many years chasing music, playing for crowds, but I never took the time to listen to what I really needed. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. And what's that? A life that's not just about playing notes, he said, taking her hand gently. I need something real. Something deeper than the applause. And I think you've always known that, haven't you? She smiled softly, her eyes sparkling with understanding. I think we both needed to grow before we could figure that out. I've spent my life trying to heal people, but I forgot to take the time for myself. You were right all along. You're not the only one who has been lost, Ev, Miles said quietly. I spent years thinking I could escape everything, my fears, my doubts, by hiding in music. But I think the truth is, I was running from something I wasn't ready to face. And what's that? Evelyn asked, squeezing his hand. He paused, looking up at the night sky. I was running from the idea that I needed someone to share it all with. Someone who understood the silence between the notes. Evelyn's heart swelled with emotion. She hadn't expected this conversation tonight, hadn't known how much they both still needed to say. She had always known there was something deeper between them, but now, hearing his confession, it felt like the final piece had fallen into place. I've been afraid of that too, she admitted softly. Afraid that what we had was a memory, not something we could bring back. But I was wrong. The air between them shifted, the cool breeze carrying with it the unspoken promise of a new beginning. They stood there for a moment, not needing to say anything more, just letting the quiet envelop them. Finally, Miles broke the silence, his voice low and sincere. Evie, would you stay with me? Not just for tonight, but for the long haul. I want to see where this goes. Whatever it is. No more running. She took a deep breath, her heart swelling with a mixture of excitement and fear. I don't know where this is going, Miles. But I do know this: I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever. We've spent enough time apart. His eyes softened, and he stepped closer. Then let's take our time. Together. And in that moment, as the city bustled around them, Evelyn and Miles realized that the music they had shared, the music that had first brought them together, was only the beginning. They had a new melody now, one that was still being written, note by note. The weeks following their confession were a whirlwind of rediscovery and quiet moments. Evelyn and Miles found themselves in each other's company more often than they had imagined. King's Cross had become their meeting place, their shared point of departure and arrival. Every time they met, it felt like the world had slowed down for just a little while, allowing them to savor the time they had together. Their first few weeks together were spent not in grand gestures, but in the small, intimate acts of daily life. Miles would send Evelyn little notes, just like the ones they used to share when they were younger. Handwritten, often filled with jokes about trumpet practice or tales from the road, they would always end with the simple words, "I miss you." And Evelyn, for her part, would write back with updates on her life at St. Thomas's, her patients, her colleagues, the challenges she faced in the ever-demanding world of nursing. She wrote with a softness that only Miles could bring out, her words flowing as easily as a favorite song. The silence that once defined their relationship had now been filled with the sound of their voices, their words, and their laughter. They began to make plans for the future, plans they hadn't dared make when they were younger. Together, they started to create a life that was theirs, one built on the foundation of their shared history, their music, and the quiet understanding they had developed over the years. One afternoon, as the leaves began to turn golden in the autumn breeze, Evelyn invited Miles to her flat for a simple dinner. She had prepared a meal of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and a salad with vinaigrette, nothing fancy, but it felt like an accomplishment. She had always been a woman of duty, of long hours and hard work, but tonight, she wanted to do something for herself. And for him. When Miles arrived, he brought a bottle of red wine, a gift for the occasion. He entered her flat with a familiar smile, the same smile that had once made her heart flutter when they were teenagers. And, though they were both much older now, the warmth of his gaze still carried that same intensity. "It smells incredible," he said, setting the wine down on the table. "But I warn you, I'm not great with mashed potatoes." Evelyn laughed. "I'm sure they'll be fine. I think the secret is a little extra butter." They sat down to eat, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt a sense of peace she hadn't known she'd been missing. The room was warm, the conversation light, and the food, while simple, felt like it held all the love she had been storing up over the years. For the first time in a long time, she felt complete. After dinner, they sat on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, the silence between them not uncomfortable, but rather a quiet understanding. It was as if they had picked up exactly where they had left off, no time lost, no words wasted. "You know," Miles said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "when I was on the road, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. I thought the music, the applause, it was everything. But now..." He paused, taking a sip of wine. "Now, I'm not so sure. I think I've spent so many years chasing something that wasn't mine to begin with." Evelyn tilted her head, studying him with a quiet intensity. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he continued, looking down at his glass, "I think I've been trying to outrun myself. I thought if I kept moving, kept playing, I could leave all the doubts behind. But being here, with you, it feels like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. Finally, home." Evelyn's heart softened, and without thinking, she reached out to gently take his hand. "You've always had a way with words, Miles. But sometimes, you don't need to run at all. Sometimes, all you need is to stop." Miles looked up, meeting her gaze. "Stop." She smiled. "Stop running. Stop searching. Just be." They sat there for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in, and for the first time, Miles felt like he could breathe. He wasn't running anymore. He was here, with her, and that was enough. In the weeks that followed, their bond grew even deeper. They traveled together, taking small trips to the countryside, visiting museums, and even exploring the hidden gems of London they had both overlooked during their younger years. Every moment spent together was a discovery of each other, of the world around them, and of the future they were beginning to build. But as the months passed, something else started to stir within them, both the realization that their time together could not be measured in weeks or months, but in the moments of genuine connection they shared. Their conversations turned to more serious matters about careers, dreams, and the possibility of growing old together. They began to talk about the future not as a distant concept, but as something tangible, something they could touch and shape with their own hands. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace in Evelyn's flat, Miles turned to her, his expression serious but full of warmth. "Evie," he said, his voice soft and steady, "I know we've been through a lot to get here. And I know we're both still figuring things out. But I want to ask you something." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. "What is it, Miles?" He reached for her hand, his fingers trembling slightly. Would you consider making this more than just a friendship? I can't imagine my life without you anymore, Evie. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Evelyn stared at him, her mind racing. She had never thought about it like that before. Their friendship had always been the anchor in her life, the one constant she could rely on. But now, hearing his words, she felt a shift, a realization that she had always known that there was something more between them. Something that had always been there, even when they were younger. She smiled, her heart full. Yes. Yes, I think I've known that all along. And in that moment, everything changed. They weren't just two friends trying to find their way back to each other. They were partners, ready to face whatever the future held together. The months that followed their confession were filled with moments of quiet revelation, small victories, and the occasional setback. Evelyn and Miles found themselves falling into a routine, but this routine felt different, it felt right. They weren't rushing anymore. They weren't searching for something they had lost. They were creating a new rhythm, a melody built from the comfort of shared silences and the laughter that bloomed between them like flowers in spring. Evelyn continued her work at St. Thomas's, and though her days were long and demanding, there was a new lightness to her step. She was no longer burdened by the weight of what could have been, but instead embraced what was, her patience, her colleagues, her role in the world. And at night, she returned home to a small, quiet flat that had become a sanctuary, where the echoes of the day faded into the warmth of Miles's presence. Miles, too, had found his rhythm. He still traveled for performances, but the days of endless tours had slowed. He had begun to play more locally, taking on teaching gigs at music schools and leading small ensembles in intimate settings. He still played for crowds, but now, the applause felt different. It was quieter, more intimate, a reflection of the music he had always been meant to create. And through it all, they had each other. They had the time to savor their connection, to talk for hours about everything and nothing, to explore the world around them together. They visited the parks in London, took weekend trips to the countryside, and spent evenings cooking dinner together in Evelyn's flat, the scent of garlic and rosemary filling the air as they worked side by side in the kitchen. But one evening, as autumn began to settle into winter, their lives would change once again. It had started as an ordinary night. Evelyn was preparing her favorite recipe, a simple chicken and vegetable stew. Miles had arrived early, his trumpet case in hand, and had set up in the living room to practice for an upcoming performance. The quiet rhythm of their lives had become second nature to them. They ate dinner, talked about their day, and laughed at the silly things that happened. Then, as the evening drew on, Miles turned to her with a look that she had come to recognize, a mixture of uncertainty and determination. "Evie," he began, his voice steady but filled with an underlying tension, "I've been thinking." Evelyn put down her fork, her gaze soft but curious. "About what?" "I've been thinking about us. About what we're building here. And, I guess I'm ready for something more." She didn't need to ask what he meant. The thought had been hovering in the back of her mind for weeks now, but hearing him say it aloud brought a mixture of excitement and fear. "More?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "More," he repeated. I think I'm ready to take the next step. To make this more than just our time together in between everything else. I want us to really build a future. A future where we're not just sharing the quiet moments, but where we're sharing everything." Evelyn felt her breath catch in her throat. She had known this moment was coming, the moment when they would need to face what their future together might look like. But even so, it took her by surprise. The vulnerability in his words, the way he laid himself bare before her, made her heart swell. "You mean?" she started, her voice faltering. "You mean a life together?" Miles nodded. "A life together. I know we're both older now, but I don't want to wait any longer, Evie. I want to share everything with you, the good, the bad, the music, the silence. I want us to build something that's ours." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she reached for his, her heart racing in her chest. She had spent so many years searching for meaning, for purpose, for something that would give her life a sense of fulfillment. But now, sitting across from Miles, she realized that what she had been searching for had always been here. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I want that too. I've wanted that for so long." Miles smiled, his eyes softening with relief. "Then let's do it. Together." It wasn't a grand declaration. There were no fireworks or dramatic moments. Just the simple, quiet promise of a shared life. A life that was built on the foundation of years of friendship, music, and love. And in that moment, Evelyn realized that everything she had ever needed was here, right in front of her. The decision to build their life together wasn't an easy one. They both had their fears of change, of the unknown, of the mistakes they might make along the way. But they also had a bond that was stronger than either of them had ever imagined. They had spent so many years apart, but now that they were together, they knew they were ready to face whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, they began to make plans for the future. They talked about moving in together, about the possibility of marriage, about what their life might look like if they built a home, not just for the two of them, but for the family they hoped to create. They spent evenings poring over apartment listings, searching for a place that felt like it could be theirs. They laughed over the ridiculous prices of flats in central London and bemoaned the tiny kitchens that seemed to be the norm. But through it all, they were building something real. And as the new year approached, Evelyn and Miles stood at the threshold of a new chapter in their lives. They had both spent years chasing different dreams, living in different worlds, but now they had found their way back to each other. And this time, they weren't letting go. The next few months were a blur of excitement and uncertainty. Evelyn and Miles had made the decision to start a life together, and though they had been through many changes in their lives, this was by far the most transformative. They weren't just blending two lives anymore, they were creating something new, something they could call their own. It wasn't easy. Finding a flat in London was a challenge, to say the least. Every listing seemed either too small or too expensive, or it was located in a neighborhood that neither of them felt was quite right. They spent countless hours online, scrolling through apartment listings and making phone calls. When they finally found a place, a cozy two-bedroom flat in a quiet neighborhood just outside of the city center, they both felt a wave of relief wash over them. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. The flat had high ceilings, wooden floors that creaked slightly when you walked, and large windows that let in the soft light of the afternoon. There was a small kitchen, just big enough for the two of them to cook together, and a living room that felt like a sanctuary after long days. It was simple, but it felt like home. The process of moving in was an adventure in itself. Evelyn had never lived with anyone long-term before, and Miles had spent most of his adult life on the road. There were adjustments to be made, learning each other's habits, figuring out how to share space, and, of course, deciding what to keep and what to throw away. One evening, as they sat on the floor surrounded by boxes, laughing at the sheer amount of things they had accumulated over the years, Evelyn turned to Miles with a smile. "We've accumulated a lot of stuff," she said, holding up an old coffee mug that had somehow made it through all of their moves. Miles chuckled. Yeah, well, some things are worth holding onto. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Like what? Miles looked at her with a playful grin. Like this, he said, taking her hand and giving it a gentle squeeze. This is worth holding onto. She smiled, her heart swelling with affection. That, I'll agree with. As they unpacked the last of the boxes and arranged their things around the flat, it felt like the final piece of their puzzle had clicked into place. They were building something together, not just a physical space, but a life, a future. But with the excitement of settling into their new home came the inevitable challenges. Miles's work schedule was as demanding as ever, and Evelyn's long hours at St. Thomas's left her feeling drained some days. There were moments of doubt, of wondering if they had made the right choice, or if they were moving too quickly. But in those moments, they always turned to each other. One evening, after a long day, they sat together in the living room, their backs against the couch, the dim light from the lamp casting a soft glow around them. Miles was holding his trumpet case, running his fingers over the brass like he was preparing for something. Evelyn watched him for a moment before speaking. "You're thinking about the road again, aren't you?" she asked quietly. Miles looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe. It's always there, Ev. The music, the travel. The idea that I could just leave, you know." Evelyn nodded, her voice gentle. "I get it. I do. But I think we both know it's not the same anymore." He sighed and set his trumpet down on the floor. "I know. I don't know how to stop. I've spent so much of my life running, chasing something that I thought was important. But when I'm here, with you, everything feels different." Evelyn leaned closer, her hand resting on his. "You don't have to stop playing. You don't have to give up the music. But you don't have to run either. Not anymore." Miles looked at her, the weight of her words settling in his chest. "I don't want to run anymore. I don't want to be that person anymore." Evelyn smiled softly. "Then don't be. Be the person who stays. The person who builds." And in that moment, something shifted. The future, once so uncertain, suddenly felt full of possibility. As the weeks turned into months, their lives began to take shape in ways they hadn't expected. They both found a balance between their careers and their new life together, carving out time for each other in the spaces between. Evelyn's work at St. Thomas's remained demanding, but she found solace in the quiet moments they shared when she returned home, whether it was cooking together, sitting side by side on the couch, or simply walking hand in hand through the park. Miles, too, had begun to settle into his new rhythm. He still performed, but he had made the decision to slow down his travels. He took on more local gigs, taught a few private lessons, and even began collaborating with a local jazz band. The applause was no longer his driving force. It was the music itself and the quiet joy of playing for people who truly appreciated what he had to offer. And then, one evening, as they sat together at their small kitchen table, Miles turned to Evelyn with a look of quiet determination in his eyes. "Evie," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I've been thinking." She looked up from her cup of tea, her brow furrowing slightly. "About what?" "I think I want to take the next step. I don't want to wait anymore. I want to build a life with you, everything, the whole thing. I want to make this official. I want us to be a family." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. The words she had been waiting to hear, the words she had known all along, were finally being spoken aloud. She put down her cup and took his hands in hers, her voice full of emotion. "Yes," she said softly. "I want that too. I want a life with you. A real life." And just like that, in the quiet of their kitchen, surrounded by the simple comforts of their home, they knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together. They weren't just building a home. They were building a family. And for the first time in their lives, they both felt like they had found exactly where they were meant to be. As the seasons changed, so did Evelyn and Miles's life. What had started as a dream of sharing their days, their quiet moments, and their love had transformed into something deeper, something that was more than just a relationship. It was a partnership. A family. The decision to move forward with their future together had felt natural, but it was also overwhelming. They weren't just building a home anymore, they were building a life that would sustain them for years to come. And with that life came the unspoken understanding that they would face challenges, just as any couple would, but they were ready to take them on together. One of the first decisions they made was to adopt a dog. It wasn't a big decision, not in the grand scheme of things, but it felt like an important one. They had always wanted a dog but had never felt settled enough to commit. Now, with a home to call their own, they decided to visit the local shelter. It was a rainy Saturday morning when they walked into the shelter, their hands wrapped around cups of coffee to stave off the chill. The smell of wet fur and bleach hung in the air, and the sound of dogs barking echoed in the large, open room. Evelyn, who had always been more of a cat person, couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement as she walked past the kennels. There was something about the energy of the place, about the hope that each animal had for a family, that made her heart swell. "Which one do you think we should adopt?" Miles asked, his voice playful. Evelyn grinned. "I don't know. I think we should get the one who's the least energetic." "Oh, I'm sure that's going to work out perfectly," he teased. They spent hours in the shelter, walking past row after row of dogs, each one more eager than the last to find a home. Finally, as they reached the last row, a small, scrappy terrier caught Evelyn's eye. The dog had soulful brown eyes and a wiry coat, and it wagged its tail energetically when it saw them. Miles crouched down, offering the dog his hand. The terrier sniffed at him for a moment before licking his fingers, its excitement palpable. "This one," Miles said, looking up at Evelyn with a smile. "I think we've found him." Evelyn knelt beside him, gently petting the dog's head. "He's perfect." They decided to name him Oliver after a character from one of their favorite books. He was energetic, playful, and exactly what they needed to fill the space in their hearts and home. Over the next few weeks, Oliver became a central part of their lives. He greeted them every morning with an enthusiastic wag of his tail, and he followed them everywhere, his small paws clicking on the hardwood floors. Evelyn and Miles found themselves laughing more than they had in months, their hearts warmed by the small dog's boundless energy and love. But life, as always, was more than just playful moments with the dog. They still had their careers, their dreams, and the weight of their own responsibilities. Evelyn's work at St. Thomas's was demanding. She had always been passionate about her role as a nurse, but lately, she had been considering taking on more leadership responsibilities. She had been approached by one of her colleagues to take on a managerial role, overseeing a department. It was a big step, one that would require her to leave her patient-centered work behind for something more administrative. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it, but she knew she couldn't ignore the opportunity. She had always wanted to make a greater impact, and this could be her chance. One evening, after dinner, she sat down with Miles, her mind still swirling with the possibilities. "I've been offered a new position at the hospital," she said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "It's more managerial, overseeing a department instead of working with patients directly." Miles raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "And how do you feel about it?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I've always loved being with patients. But this could be a chance to make a real difference on a larger scale. The problem is, I'm not sure if it's the right time. I don't want to lose the connection I have with the people I help." Miles leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "You've always been good at what you do, Evie. And you've always been so driven. I think this could be the next step for you, if it feels right. But only if it feels right." Evelyn smiled at his words. She knew he was right. She had always believed that the best decisions were the ones that aligned with who you were and what you truly wanted. She wasn't sure yet, but she knew she would take her time to think it through. The next few days were filled with long conversations, quiet reflection, and visits to the hospital. She shadowed her colleague, getting a sense of what the role would require. Eventually, she came to the conclusion that this was the right move for her. She wanted to make a bigger impact, to help guide others and improve patient care on a larger scale. The decision wasn't easy, but it was hers to make. And with Miles's support, Evelyn knew she could take on the challenge. Meanwhile, Miles had his own challenges to face. Though he had scaled back on his touring schedule, he was still deeply involved in the music scene. He had always dreamed of starting his own jazz program, a place where young musicians could come together to learn, create, and share their craft. The idea had been with him for years, but now, with his new life in London, he felt ready to make it a reality. He spent countless hours working on his vision, writing proposals, and meeting with various musicians and potential partners. It was an ambitious goal, but it was a goal that filled him with excitement and purpose. One evening, as they sat on the couch with Oliver curled up at their feet, Miles turned to Evelyn with a grin. "I've made a decision," he said. "I'm going to start the program." Evelyn's eyes lit up. "That's amazing, Miles. I knew you'd do it." He shrugged, looking a little sheepish. "Well, it's not going to be easy. But I think it's time." "I'm so proud of you," Evelyn said, reaching out to take his hand. "You're going to make such a difference." And so, they both embarked on new journeys, Evelyn with her new role at the hospital, and Miles with his music program. They were both nervous, excited, and unsure of the challenges ahead. But they had each other. They had a home, a family, and the kind of love that could withstand anything life threw their way. They didn't have all the answers, and they didn't know exactly where this new path would lead them. But they were ready to face it together. And with that, they knew they had everything they needed to build the life they had always dreamed of. As the months passed, Evelyn and Miles settled into their new life. The apartment that had once been a new and unfamiliar place had now become their sanctuary. It was filled with the rhythm of their daily lives: morning coffee, evening meals, shared glances across the room, and the occasional silence that spoke volumes. The love they shared was no longer a quiet, unspoken thing, but a loud and constant presence in their home. It wasn't always perfect, but it was theirs. They had built a life together piece by piece, day by day, and with each passing moment, they grew stronger, not just as a couple, but as individuals who were now part of something larger than themselves. Evelyn had accepted the managerial role at St. Thomas's, and while the transition had been challenging, it felt like the right decision. She had gone from caring for patients to overseeing the hospital's operations, but she had found a new kind of fulfillment in her work. She was still helping people, just on a larger scale, and her leadership had begun to make an impact. But the change wasn't without its sacrifices. The long hours and increased responsibility took a toll on her. Some days, she found herself too tired to think, let alone cook or relax. She began to struggle with the balance between her career and her personal life, torn between her commitment to her patients and her desire to be present for Miles. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Evelyn returned home to find Miles sitting on the couch, his trumpet resting beside him. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow from the lamps casting a warm light across the room. Oliver, their dog, lay curled up at Miles's feet, snoring softly. "You okay?" Miles asked, his voice gentle as he looked up from his sheet music. Evelyn sighed, closing the door behind her. "I'm just exhausted." I thought I'd have more time to adjust, but the new role at the hospital is a lot more demanding than I expected. Miles nodded, sensing the weight in her voice. He had been paying close attention to her stress levels and the way she seemed to withdraw whenever the pressure mounted. He knew she had always prided herself on being able to handle everything, but he could see that this was different. This was bigger than what she had dealt with before. "You don't have to do it all, you know," he said softly. "You're allowed to take a break. We both are." Evelyn smiled, though it was weary. "I don't know how to slow down. I've spent my whole life working, building, taking care of people. It's hard to let go." "Hey," Miles said, standing up and walking toward her. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders, looking into her eyes. "You've done so much already. You've built a life for us, for yourself. But you don't have to carry the weight of everything alone. I'm here. We're a team." The sincerity in his voice brought a lump to her throat. She had been carrying so much on her own, trying to balance everything while pretending like she had it all under control. But here, with Miles, she realized she didn't have to do it all. "I know," she said quietly. "I just feel like I'm letting people down. I don't want to lose what I've worked so hard for, but I don't want to lose us either." "You won't," Miles assured her. "You're doing amazing things, Evie. But you're not alone in this. I've got you. We've got each other." His words were a balm to the parts of her that had been bruised by the weight of responsibility. She leaned into him, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability, the exhaustion melting away for the first time in days. "I'm so lucky to have you," she whispered. Miles smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm the lucky one." As the weeks went on, Evelyn began to adjust to her new role at the hospital, finding a rhythm that allowed her to balance her professional and personal lives. She started to delegate more, trusting her team to take on tasks that she had once felt responsible for herself. Slowly but surely, she began to find a sense of peace, knowing that she didn't have to do everything alone. Miles, too, had found a balance. He had started his music program, and while it was still in its early stages, it had begun to take off. Young musicians were showing interest, and the classes were filling up. He had started to teach, passing on the knowledge he had spent so many years accumulating. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose beyond the applause. But despite their successes, there were still challenges ahead. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, a letter arrived for Evelyn. She opened it slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she read the contents. It was an invitation to speak at a medical conference in the United States, a recognition of her growing reputation in the field. The opportunity was huge, but it would require her to be away for several weeks. Evelyn looked at Miles, her face a mixture of excitement and hesitation. This could be a great opportunity, but it would mean being away from home for a while. Miles studied her for a moment before speaking. "It's a big decision, Evie. But if anyone deserves it, it's you. You've worked so hard for this." She nodded, knowing he was right. "I want to go. But I don't want to leave you alone." "You won't be alone," Miles said, reaching for her hand. "I'll be right here. And we'll make it work, just like we always do." Evelyn smiled, the weight of the decision lifting slightly. She had spent so long trying to balance everything, trying to make everyone else happy. But for the first time, she realized that it was okay to prioritize herself. It was okay to take this opportunity for her own growth, even if it meant being away from home for a while. "Thank you," she said softly. "For being so supportive." Miles smiled, squeezing her hand. "Always, Ev. Always." The day Evelyn left for the conference was bittersweet. They said their goodbyes at the airport, both of them filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. As she walked through security, she looked back at Miles, who waved her off with a warm smile. "I'll be here when you get back," he called out. Evelyn waved back, feeling a surge of love for the man who had become her partner in everything. As she boarded the plane, she realized that while this was a huge step for her career, it was also another step in the journey they had started together. And no matter where she went, no matter how far apart they might be for a while, they would always find their way back to each other. The weeks passed quickly, and soon, Evelyn found herself on a plane to the United States for the medical conference. The opportunity was everything she had worked for, a culmination of years spent pouring her heart into her work. It was a chance to be recognized on a global scale, to share her knowledge and experience with others in her field. Miles, too, was busy with his own endeavors. His music program had grown steadily, and he had found himself in demand for performances, teaching, and collaborations. It was a dream he had long held, but it had taken time to realize. And though he was excited about the future, he couldn't deny that he missed Evelyn more than he had anticipated. As Evelyn settled into her new routine at the conference, she felt a sense of accomplishment that she hadn't known before. The days were filled with lectures, discussions, and presentations, but there were also quiet moments of reflection. She found herself thinking about her life back home, about Miles, and the small family they were building together. There was a part of her that felt torn between her career and the life she had left behind. In the evenings, she would call Miles, telling him about her day, the people she had met, and the ideas she had shared. He would listen patiently, offering encouragement and advice, always reminding her that she was doing something important. And while they were apart, their connection remained as strong as ever. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Evelyn sat on the balcony of her hotel room, staring out at the city skyline. The lights below twinkled like stars, and the noise of the city hummed in the background. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the world lift off her shoulders, even if just for a moment. She was doing it. She was making her mark, not just in her career, but in her life. But a part of her longed to be home. To be with Miles. To return to the simplicity of their life together. Back in London, Miles was feeling the weight of the days without Evelyn. He had thrown himself into his work, but even the most exciting gigs and performances couldn't fill the space she had left behind. He missed her presence the way she would always know when something was bothering him, even without him saying a word. The way she would make him laugh, even when he didn't feel like it. One evening, as he walked home from a late-night rehearsal, he passed by a bookstore he had often frequented. He glanced inside and saw a familiar sight, a section filled with books on music, jazz, and performance. His eyes landed on a small, worn book on the shelf, the very same book Evelyn had once mentioned to him. It was a collection of jazz musicians' memoirs, a book she had read years ago and had always said was one of her favorites. He stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly as he entered. The store smelled of paper and ink, the quiet ambience a perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of the streets outside. He wandered over to the shelf and pulled the book from the shelf, the pages creaking slightly as he opened it. He smiled, remembering the way Evelyn had described the book, the way her eyes had lit up when she talked about it. He stood there for a few moments, lost in thought, before he heard a soft voice behind him. "Can I help you find anything?" He turned to see the shopkeeper, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "Just browsing," Miles said with a smile. "But I think I've found what I was looking for." The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what might that be?" "A reminder of someone I'm missing," he replied quietly. The woman smiled knowingly. "Ah. I know the feeling." He nodded, still holding the book in his hands. "It's funny, isn't it? How certain things can remind you of a person so clearly, even when they're not around." She nodded again. "Sometimes the smallest things, books, songs, smells, can bring us back to a place, a person, a moment." Miles smiled softly. "Yeah. I think I understand that now." With the book in hand, Miles left the shop and made his way home. As he walked through the quiet streets of London, he felt a deep sense of longing for Evelyn. He couldn't wait for her to return. He had missed her more than he had anticipated, and now, more than ever, he was certain that their time apart had made their bond stronger than before. Several days later, Evelyn returned to London, her heart both full and heavy with the experiences she had gained during her time at the conference. She had learned so much, met so many incredible people, and felt like she was on the verge of something new. But no matter how successful her career had become, the moment she stepped off the plane and into the familiar embrace of the city, she knew where she truly belonged. She found Miles waiting for her at the airport, his familiar smile and warm embrace making everything feel right again. "Welcome home," he said softly, pulling her close. "I've missed you," she whispered, holding him tightly. "I've missed you too," he replied. More than I can say. As they stood there in the bustle of the airport, the world moving around them, they knew that no matter where their individual journeys took them, they had found something in each other that would last a lifetime. And as they walked out into the cool London night, hand in hand, they knew that their shared path was only just beginning. The weeks that followed Evelyn's return from the United States were filled with the kind of ordinary, comforting routine that only comes after the chaos of major transitions. The conference had opened doors for her, cementing her reputation in her field and expanding her network. Yet, despite the recognition and the opportunities ahead, Evelyn found herself cherishing the simple moments she shared with Miles even more. At the same time, Miles's music program continued to grow, but it came with its own set of challenges. There were the financial pressures of running a program, the juggling of his own performances with the need to mentor and guide young musicians, and the constant balancing act of keeping his passion alive while managing the day-to-day demands of his burgeoning project. It wasn't easy, but every success, no matter how small, was a reminder of why he had started in the first place. And then, there were the moments when life threw curveballs that neither of them had seen coming. One evening, as they sat together in the living room after dinner, Evelyn received an unexpected phone call. It was from a former colleague at St. Thomas's Hospital, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. "Evelyn," the voice on the other end said, "I've got something I think you'll want to hear. We've just been approved for a major research project, something that could change the entire field. And we'd like you to head it up." Evelyn's heart raced as the details of the offer unfolded. The project was groundbreaking, an opportunity to lead a team of top-tier researchers in a new initiative focused on improving patient care across multiple hospitals. The scope of the project was enormous, and the recognition that came with it would be unparalleled. But there was a catch. The project was based in New York. Evelyn's mind immediately began to race. The thought of moving to another country, uprooting her life once again, was both thrilling and terrifying. She had worked so hard to get to where she was, and now, here was an opportunity that could take her career to new heights. But at what cost? Miles noticed the shift in her expression as she hung up the phone, her hand still gripping the receiver. "Evie?" he asked, concern in his voice. "What's going on?" "It's a job offer," she said slowly, her voice tinged with both excitement and uncertainty. "A huge opportunity. A research project in New York. They want me to head it up." Miles leaned back in his chair, processing the words. "New York. That's incredible. But I don't know what to do," Evelyn continued, her voice faltering. "I've worked so hard to get to this point, but it means leaving London. Leaving us." Miles was quiet for a moment, letting the weight of the decision settle between them. He knew this was a moment of reckoning for both of them. Their lives had changed so much in the past few years, and they had built something beautiful together. But was it time to go after their individual dreams again? Could they really put their lives on hold for each other's sake? I think you know what you want to do, Miles said softly, his voice filled with tenderness. This is your career, your dream, Evie. I've always supported you, and I always will. But you have to make the decision for you. Evelyn looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. He was right. This wasn't just about their relationship, it was about her growth, and what she wanted to achieve in her career. But the idea of leaving everything behind, of moving so far away from the life they had built together, seemed impossible. I just don't want to lose this, she said, her voice trembling. I don't want to lose you. Miles reached across the table, taking her hands in his. Evie, you're not going to lose me. Not now, not ever. We've built something together, and no matter where you go, we'll always be a team. This isn't the end. It's just another chapter. She swallowed hard, her heart in her throat. She had always known that pursuing her dreams meant making tough decisions. But this was a different kind of decision. It was a crossroads, a place where their individual dreams and their shared life intersected. The silence in the room was palpable as they sat there, both of them lost in thought. The clock ticked on, the world outside continuing to move. Evelyn felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her chest. But then, as if the decision had already been made, she took a deep breath and nodded. I'll do it, she said quietly, her voice steady. I'll go to New York. Miles smiled, his heart swelling with pride. Then we'll make it work. We'll find a way. You go after your dreams, Evie. And I'll be right here. Evelyn felt a wave of relief wash over her. She knew that this was the right choice for her, an opportunity she couldn't pass up. And while it wasn't going to be easy, she also knew that with Miles by her side, they could make it work. They had built something together that was strong enough to withstand distance, time, and change. The next few months were filled with preparations for the move. Evelyn began the process of transferring her work to New York, making arrangements for her new role in the research project. Miles, for his part, was supportive, though he couldn't deny the bittersweet feeling that lingered as he watched her pack up their home. The night before Evelyn left, they sat together on the couch, holding hands, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The apartment was quiet, the sound of the city outside barely audible. I'm going to miss you, Miles said, his voice thick with emotion. More than I can say. Evelyn turned to him, her heart full. I'm going to miss you too. But this isn't goodbye. We'll make it work. We always do. Miles smiled through his tears. I love you, Evie. I love you too, she whispered. And with that, they knew that no matter what the future held, they would always find their way back to each other. The months following Evelyn's departure to New York were filled with both excitement and sorrow. Evelyn dove headfirst into her new role, leading the groundbreaking research project with the same passion and commitment that had always defined her. Her work was rewarding, intellectually fulfilling, and gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't realized she had been craving. She was making a difference in ways she never thought possible, pushing boundaries, and shaping the future of patient care. But no matter how fulfilling her work was, there was always a void she couldn't ignore: the absence of Miles. The distance between them was more than just physical, it was emotional, too. The rhythm of their lives, which had once been so perfectly aligned, now felt disjointed, like two instruments playing in different keys. Evelyn found herself longing for the small moments they had shared: the evenings spent cooking together, the quiet walks through the park, the shared laughter over a glass of wine. The calls, though frequent, were never enough. The texts and emails seemed to pale in comparison to the sound of his voice, the feel of his hand in hers. They spoke every day, but the absence of his presence weighed heavily on her. Miles, too, struggled with the separation. He had thrown himself into his music program, his performances, and the students he was mentoring. But despite his outward success, something was missing. He found himself waking up in the middle of the night, reaching out for her side of the bed, only to find the sheets cold and empty. He missed the sound of her voice in the mornings, the warmth of her smile when he came home after a long day, the way she always knew how to calm his racing thoughts. He had always supported her dreams, and he still did, but the space between them was harder to navigate than he had anticipated. The distance had made him question everything: their future, their plans, and whether they were really strong enough to withstand the separation. One evening, as he sat in his apartment, staring out at the London skyline, he picked up his phone and called her. The call rang a few times before she answered. "Hey, Miles," Evelyn said, her voice warm but tinged with exhaustion. "How's everything?" "It's going," he replied, his tone a little distant. "Busy as usual. How about you?" "Same," she said with a sigh. "Work's been intense. I'm learning a lot, but it feels like I'm always on the go. I miss you, though." The words were simple, but they hit him harder than he expected. He missed her too. More than he could express. "I miss you too, Ev," he said softly. "More than I thought I would. I thought we were handling this better," she admitted. "But every day feels like we're getting further apart." Miles closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He had been so focused on being supportive, on giving her the space she needed to pursue her career, that he hadn't realized how much he was struggling with the separation. "We'll figure it out," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "We've always found a way, right?" Evelyn's voice softened. "I hope so. I don't want us to drift, Miles. I don't want to wake up one day and realize we've lost everything." "We won't lose it," he said firmly. "We just need to keep fighting for us. Even if it's hard." There was a long pause between them, the silence echoing louder than their words. Miles could hear the faint hum of the city in the background of Evelyn's call, and he wished more than anything that he could be there with her, to share the moment, to remind her that he was still with her, even if he was miles away. "We'll figure it out," she repeated softly. "Together." "Always," Miles promised. "No matter the distance." As the weeks passed, they continued to navigate the challenges of living in different cities, separated by oceans and continents. The calls and messages continued, but the physical absence was something neither of them could ignore. Miles decided to visit Evelyn in New York, to bridge the gap between their two worlds and try to rekindle the connection they had lost in the distance. He arrived at the airport early in the morning, exhausted from the flight but eager to see her. He stepped out of the terminal and into the bustling streets of the city, the cold winter air hitting him like a wave. His mind raced with anticipation as he made his way to her apartment, his heart pounding with the hope that this visit would bring them back to each other. When Evelyn opened the door, her face lit up with surprise and relief. She didn't say anything at first, just stepped forward and pulled him into an embrace. The familiarity of her touch, the warmth of her presence, made everything feel right again. "I missed you," she whispered, holding him tightly. "I missed you too," Miles replied, his voice thick with emotion. They stood there for a moment, just holding each other, the distance between them melting away in an instant. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But in that moment, they both realized that no matter how far apart they were, they would always find their way back to each other. For the next few days, they spent their time rediscovering each other. They walked through Central Park, visited art galleries, and shared quiet meals at Evelyn's favorite restaurant. They talked about everything and nothing about their work, their dreams, and their fears. And as they did, they found a renewed sense of connection, a reminder of why they had fallen in love in the first place. But as the time to say goodbye drew closer, Evelyn and Miles both knew that this visit was just a temporary solution. The challenges of living in different cities would still be there when Miles returned to London, and Evelyn's work in New York would continue to demand more of her time. "I wish you didn't have to go back," Evelyn said one evening, as they sat on the couch in her apartment, Oliver curled up at their feet. "I don't want to go either," Miles said, his voice heavy with the same longing that had filled their conversations. "But I'll be back soon. We'll keep making it work." Evelyn smiled, her eyes filled with both love and sadness. "I know. And I'll be here, waiting for you. We just have to keep going, one step at a time." Miles nodded, his hand gently squeezing hers. "One step at a time." As the days passed and the time for his departure drew nearer, they both knew that this was just another chapter in their story. The distance between them was never easy, but it was a test of their commitment, their love, and their ability to navigate the challenges of life. And no matter how difficult it became, they were willing to fight for it. The future was still uncertain. There would be more difficult decisions, more challenges to face. But together, they knew they could handle anything. The months following Miles's visit to New York were a whirlwind of change. Evelyn had thrown herself into her work with renewed vigor, but the absence of Miles lingered in the spaces between her days. She was making strides in her career, but something felt incomplete. Despite her professional success, she felt the weight of distance more than ever. The phone calls continued, the messages, the late-night video chats. They shared their thoughts, their dreams, and their frustrations, but the physical absence between them was palpable. They had tried to maintain their connection, to make the most of the moments they had, but it was becoming harder. One evening, as Evelyn sat at her desk in her office, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Miles. "How's everything going?" She sighed, looking at the screen for a moment before typing back. "Busy. I'm starting to feel the pressure again. A big project is coming up, and I'm not sure I can balance it all." There was a pause before he responded. "You're doing amazing, Ev. But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. We need you to be okay." Evelyn smiled softly at his words. He had always been her support, her rock. But there was a new weight on her shoulders, one that had nothing to do with her career. The distance was growing, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. She set her phone down and stared out the window, her thoughts swirling. She had always known that life was about choices, about the paths you took, the decisions you made. But now, she was faced with a crossroads, one that would require a decision she wasn't sure she was ready to make. Miles, on the other hand, had been facing his own set of challenges. His music program was growing, and with it came the pressure to perform, to deliver on the dreams he had spent years building. He was grateful for the success, but it was beginning to feel like a weight he couldn't lift on his own. There were days when he missed the simplicity of their time together, the quiet evenings, the shared moments. And then, there were the nights when he found himself pacing the floor of his apartment, feeling the ache of Evelyn's absence in every corner of the room. His thoughts often returned to their last conversation in New York. They had both agreed that they would make it work. But as the days stretched on, it became clear that something had to change. They couldn't keep going this way, both of them living parallel lives, never truly in sync. They needed to find a way to close the gap between them. One night, after a particularly long rehearsal, Miles found himself sitting at his piano, his fingers resting lightly on the keys. He had been composing a new piece, but his thoughts kept drifting to Evelyn. He missed her more than he had ever imagined. And in that moment, he realized that it was time for them to face the inevitable. He needed to make a decision. He needed to be with her. But that meant making a choice, one that could change everything. The following week, Miles flew to New York, determined to find a way to reconnect, to have a conversation that would shift the direction of their relationship. When he arrived at her apartment, he was nervous, his mind racing with possibilities. They hadn't seen each other in months, and though they had been speaking regularly, it felt like the space between them had only grown wider. Evelyn opened the door, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was filled with so much unspoken emotion, both of them trying to process the weight of the time apart. Miles stepped inside, his heart pounding. "Evie," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "we need to talk." Evelyn nodded, her expression soft but wary. She knew this conversation was coming. She had been feeling the distance, too. "I've been thinking about us," Miles continued. "And I've realized something important. I don't want to keep living like this apart. I miss you. I miss us. And I know it's not easy, but I want to try. I want us to figure this out together." Evelyn took a deep breath, her chest tight with emotion. "I've been thinking the same thing," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But Miles, it's not just about being together. It's about what being together means now. We've built separate lives, and the distance isn't just physical anymore. It's emotional, too." Miles nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I know. But I don't want to lose what we have. I think we need to decide once and for all what comes next." Evelyn looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She had known for a long time that this moment was inevitable. They couldn't keep living in the in-between. "I think I'm ready," she said softly. "But I need to know you're ready, too. Are we willing to face the challenges together?" Miles stepped closer, taking her hand in his. "I am. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with relief. "Then let's figure this out. Together." The next few months were filled with new decisions, ones that would take them both down unexpected paths. They began to make plans for the future, to find a way to bridge the gap between their careers and their relationship. Evelyn considered taking a sabbatical to spend more time with Miles, while he made the decision to cut back on his performances and focus more on his teaching and the music program. It wasn't easy. They both had their careers, their passions, their dreams. But they also had each other, and that was something they were both willing to fight for. They made a pact: they would no longer let distance define them. They would find a way to be together, to create a life that allowed for both of their dreams, without compromising what they had. And as the months went by, Evelyn and Miles found themselves drawing closer than they had ever been. The challenges they had faced only made their bond stronger, their commitment to each other clearer. They knew there would be more obstacles ahead, more tough decisions to make. But for the first time, they were ready to face it all. Together. The days that followed their decision to make their relationship a priority were filled with both relief and anxiety. Evelyn and Miles knew that their future together would require sacrifices, adjustments, and compromises, but they also knew that they were ready for it. Their love had always been strong, but now it was about more than just love. It was about making a life together, one that could withstand the pressures of their individual careers and their shared dreams. The first step was finding a balance between their careers. Evelyn had taken some time off from St. Thomas's to recharge and focus on their relationship, and Miles had agreed to scale back his touring schedule to spend more time in London. Both of them knew that this was the right decision, but it wasn't easy. Miles, especially, struggled with the idea of putting his career on hold. "I'm not used to sitting still," he admitted one evening, as they sat on the couch together, Oliver curled up between them. "I've always been moving, always been on the road. I don't know what it feels like to stay in one place." Evelyn looked at him, her expression understanding. "I know. But sometimes, staying still doesn't mean giving up. It means making room for something that matters more." Miles sighed, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. "I don't want to lose the part of me that's always been chasing the music. But I also don't want to lose us." Evelyn smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "You won't lose anything. This is just a new chapter. We're still figuring it out, but we'll figure it out together." It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of wondering if they were making the right choices. But each time they faced uncertainty, they leaned into each other for support. They began to build new routines: shared breakfasts, quiet walks through the park, evenings spent cooking together. These small moments, though seemingly insignificant, became the foundation of their new life. As the months passed, their connection deepened. Evelyn began to find a rhythm at work again, taking on new challenges at St. Thomas's and eventually returning to the hospital in a leadership capacity. She had taken on a smaller role, one that allowed her to focus on both her career and her personal life. And while the work was demanding, she felt more in control than ever before. Miles, too, was thriving. His music program had grown, and he had found new ways to combine his passion for performing with his love of teaching. He was still playing, but he was also giving back to the next generation of musicians. The balance between performance and mentorship gave him a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known before. He no longer needed the constant approval of applause to feel validated. Instead, he was finding joy in the quieter moments, working with his students, composing music, and spending time with Evelyn. Their relationship, once fraught with distance and uncertainty, had grown into something solid. They knew they had to keep making adjustments, but they also knew that they were building something that was worth the effort. They had found a way to merge their careers and their lives together, without sacrificing the things they loved. One evening, after a long week of work, Evelyn and Miles sat on the couch together, exhausted but content. Oliver was nestled at their feet, and the soft glow of the lamp bathed the room in warmth. "You know," Evelyn said, breaking the silence, "I think we're doing it. We're actually making this work." Miles smiled, his arm around her shoulder. "I think we are." Evelyn turned to him, her eyes soft and full of affection. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Miles nodded, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "We've been through a lot." but I think that's what makes us stronger. Evelyn smiled, leaning into him. I'm glad I'm doing this with you. All of it? Me too, he said quietly. I wouldn't want to do it with anyone else. As they sat there, the weight of their shared journey settling around them, they knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. But they also knew that they would face it together. Their love had grown into something more than just a feeling. It had become a partnership, a commitment to each other and the future they were building. The next few months were filled with decisions about the future. They began to talk more seriously about their long-term plans, about buying a house together, about the possibility of starting a family, about what they wanted their lives to look like in the years to come. It wasn't all set in stone, but they both felt the pull towards something bigger. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Evelyn looked at Miles, her expression thoughtful. I think we're ready, she said softly. To take the next step. Miles raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean, I think we're ready to buy a house. To settle down. Miles smiled, his heart swelling with happiness. I think you're right. They began to look at houses together, visiting open houses on weekends and imagining what their future could look like. They talked about the kind of space they wanted, something cozy but spacious enough to grow into. A place where they could raise a family, where they could host friends and family for holidays, and where they could build memories. As they navigated the process, they encountered some obstacles, bidding wars, unexpected repairs, and moments of doubt. But with each challenge, they worked through it together, their bond growing stronger with each step. The process wasn't easy, but they knew that it was part of the journey they were meant to take. Finally, after months of searching, they found a house in a quiet neighborhood, with a garden in the back and plenty of space for Oliver to run. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And that was all that mattered. As they signed the papers and got the keys, they stood together in front of their new home, their hands intertwined, a sense of accomplishment and excitement filling their hearts. This is it, Evelyn said, her voice filled with emotion. This is our home, Miles replied, pulling her close. They stood there for a moment, the future stretching out before them, full of endless possibilities. And in that moment, they both knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The excitement of moving into their new home was only the beginning. Evelyn and Miles had spent weeks settling into the house, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and slowly transforming the space into a reflection of their shared life. Each room was a testament to their journey, paintings from their travels, photographs of their families, and mementos from their past. It felt like they had finally found the stability they had been yearning for. The quiet evenings, the shared routines, and the sense of home that came with having a space to call their own. But as they both knew, the next chapter of their story was just beginning. And this chapter would require them to face new challenges, ones that neither of them could have fully prepared for. One evening, after dinner, Evelyn and Miles sat on the couch together, a quiet contentment filling the space between them. Oliver was curled up at their feet, his soft snoring adding a sense of peacefulness to the room. Evelyn, with her legs tucked underneath her, glanced at Miles, her eyes thoughtful. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice soft but serious. Miles raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "About what?" "About us. About the next step," she said, her heart beating faster as she spoke. "I think we're ready." Miles smiled, his curiosity piqued. "Ready for what?" "For a family," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Miles looked at her, processing what she had just said. They had always talked about the possibility of having children, but the reality of it had never felt so close, so immediate. It was a big step, one that would change everything. "I think we are too," he said, his voice steady, though there was a hint of uncertainty behind his words. "But are we sure? I mean, this is a huge decision." Evelyn nodded, her gaze meeting his. "I know. But I think we're ready for it. We've built a life together, and we've made this house a home. I think it's time for us to start the next chapter." Miles exhaled slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always known that one day they would start a family, but hearing her speak those words aloud made it feel real. And for the first time, he felt a mix of excitement and fear of the unknown, fear of not being ready. But excitement for the new journey they would embark on together. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice vulnerable. "Not of the idea of having a family, but of being the kind of father I want to be. I don't want to screw this up." Evelyn smiled softly, her hand resting on his. "You won't screw it up. We'll figure it out together, like we always do." For the first time, the idea of parenthood didn't feel daunting. It felt like a natural progression, a continuation of everything they had already built together. They didn't have all the answers, and they knew it wouldn't be easy. But they also knew that they were ready for the challenge. The next few months were a whirlwind of excitement and preparation. They began to discuss everything from nursery designs to parenting philosophies. Evelyn dove into research, reading books and articles about pregnancy, childbirth, and parenting. Miles, while not as eager to read, began taking classes on child development and attended doctor's appointments with her. The process was both exhilarating and overwhelming. They had talked about starting a family before, but now that it was becoming a reality, the gravity of the situation hit them both. They weren't just preparing for a new chapter in their relationship, they were preparing for a life that would change forever. They also faced the challenge of balancing their careers with their new responsibilities. Evelyn's work at the hospital had become more demanding as she took on a larger leadership role, and Miles's music program was growing, with more students and performances than ever before. It wasn't easy to find the time to prepare for the baby while juggling their careers, but they made it work. One afternoon, After a particularly long day, Evelyn came home to find Miles sitting on the couch with a stack of papers spread out before him. He looked up as she entered, a smile spreading across his face. "Hey," he said, his voice warm. "How was your day?" "It was busy," she replied, sinking down onto the couch beside him. "I'm exhausted. But I got some good news. The board at the hospital approved the new initiative I've been working on." Miles grinned, leaning over to kiss her cheek. "That's amazing, Ev. I'm so proud of you." Evelyn smiled, leaning into him. "Thanks. But it's all worth it if we're doing this together. Everything I'm working for, it's for us. For our future." Miles nodded, his expression softening. "I feel the same way. I want to be the kind of father that you deserve. The kind of father I know I can be." Evelyn looked at him, her heart swelling with affection. "You already are." They sat together in the quiet of the evening, holding hands, the weight of their future resting gently between them. It was a future filled with uncertainty, with challenges they couldn't foresee, but it was also a future filled with hope. A future that they would build together, step by step. As the months passed, Evelyn's pregnancy progressed, and the reality of becoming parents set in. The nursery was decorated with soft colors and stuffed animals, and the house began to feel even more like a home. They were ready to welcome a new life into their world. The day Evelyn went into labor was nothing like they had imagined. It wasn't calm or peaceful, it was filled with the kind of frantic energy that only comes with the anticipation of something life-changing. Miles was by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, even as his own nerves threatened to take over. But through it all, they remained a team. When their baby girl was finally born, a sense of awe and wonder filled the room. Evelyn held her daughter in her arms, her heart overflowing with love. Miles looked at them both, his eyes filled with tears of joy and disbelief. "She's perfect," he whispered. Evelyn smiled through her tears. "She's ours." In that moment, everything they had worked for, everything they had built, felt like it had led to this. Parenthood was the next step, the final piece of their puzzle. And though the road ahead would be challenging, they knew that they would face it together, just as they always had. Years passed, and life continued to unfold in unexpected ways, just as it always does. Evelyn and Miles had built a life together, a life filled with love, laughter, challenges, and triumphs. Their home was no longer just a place to sleep, but a sanctuary where memories were made and dreams were nurtured. Their daughter, Lily, had grown into a curious, energetic little girl with the same spark in her eyes that Evelyn had once seen in Miles. She had inherited her father's love of music and her mother's compassion, and Evelyn couldn't help but marvel at the way their worlds had expanded to accommodate this tiny human being who had brought so much joy into their lives. As Lily grew, the house filled with more laughter, more noise, and more life. The nursery they had decorated together all those years ago had become her room, filled with books and toys, walls painted in soft pastel colors that reflected the warmth of their family. The living room, once a place of quiet conversation, now echoed with the sounds of Lily singing and the tap-tap of her tiny feet running through the hallways. Evelyn and Miles had learned the art of balancing their careers, their love for one another, and their role as parents. They had found their rhythm, their harmony, just like a well-rehearsed symphony. There were still moments of doubt, times when they questioned if they were doing everything right, but there was also the deep knowledge that they were doing it together. Miles had continued with his music program, mentoring young musicians, and performing when he could. His career had flourished, and his name had become synonymous with both artistry and generosity. He was no longer the restless musician chasing the next big performance. Instead, he was a teacher, a mentor, and a father, someone who knew that the real music in life wasn't in the applause, but in the relationships he had built. Evelyn had risen through the ranks at St. Thomas's, her leadership skills respected by colleagues and patients alike. She had become a beacon of strength in the medical community, always striving to improve the care and compassion given to those who needed it most. But despite her professional achievements, she had never lost sight of what truly mattered: her family, her home, and the love that sustained them. Together, they had built a life that was rich with meaning, a life that had taught them the importance of patience, compromise, and resilience. And through it all, they had never lost the spark that had brought them together all those years ago, the spark that had ignited the fire of their love. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, watching Lily play with her toys, Evelyn and Miles exchanged a quiet smile. It had been a long day, filled with the usual chaos of parenthood and work, but in this moment, everything felt right. The house was warm, the lights dimmed, and the sound of Lily's laughter filled the air. "I can't believe how far we've come," Evelyn said, her voice soft with contentment. "I know," Miles replied, his eyes filled with the same admiration that he had always felt for her. "We've built something beautiful, haven't we?" Evelyn nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "I think we've built everything we've ever dreamed of." They sat there for a moment, watching their daughter, knowing that this was the life they had always wanted: a life of love, connection, and shared purpose. They had built their family, their home, and their future, and in doing so, they had found their way back to each other, over and over again. As the evening wore on, they went to bed, their hearts full and content. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in their lives, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, Evelyn realized that the love they had shared all these years had created something more than just a family. It had created a legacy of love, resilience, and the belief that no matter where life took them, they would always be together. Their journey wasn't over. It would never be over. But as they drifted off to sleep, they knew that whatever the future held, they had already built everything they needed to face it. Together. Forever.